Across the ancient world, societies invented execution methods not just to punish, but to display power. Here are 20 of the most famous. The brazen bull from ancient Greece. This method was designed to amplify suffering through sound and heat. The brazen bull was a hollow bronze statue. The condemned, accused of treason, was locked inside while a fire burned beneath. As the metal heated, screams echoed through acoustic tubes, emerging as the bellowing of a bull. Created around 560 BCE by the tyrant Phalaris of Sicily, its inventor Perillos became one of its first victims. Used for political enemies and traitors. Exact death counts are unknown, but ancient sources suggest dozens died inside this bronze furnace. Crucifixion. From ancient Rome, crucifixion became the empire's most feared execution. The condemned, typically rebels, slaves, or enemies of the state, was nailed or tied to a wooden cross. Death came slowly from exhaustion, asphyxiation, and exposure. It could take days. Used from the 6th century BCE through the 4th century CE. Thousands died this way. In 71 BCE alone, 6,000 followers of Spartacus were crucified along the Appian Way. Reserved for non-citizens, it was Rome's ultimate humiliation. Damnatio ad bestias. Also from ancient Rome, condemnation to the beasts. Criminals and political enemies were thrown into arenas to face lions, bears, or leopards. No weapons, no armor, just spectacle. Practiced from the 2nd century BCE to the 5th century CE. Used against murderers, arsonists, and early Christians. Thousands died in the Colosseum alone. Death was rarely instant. The crowd expected a show. Scaphism. From ancient Persia, scaphism was reserved for traitors and those guilty of extreme betrayal. The victim was trapped between two boats, force-fed milk and honey, and left floating in a stagnant pond. Insects swarmed the body. Death came from dehydration, infection, or being consumed alive. Used during the Achaemenid Empire around the 5th to 4th century BCE. Known primarily through Greek historian Plutarch's account. Rare and reserved for the most despised criminals. Specific death counts are unrecorded. Lingqi from ancient China, lingqi. Death by 1,000 cuts. Executioners made precise, shallow cuts across the body over hours, sometimes days. The goal wasn't just death, but maximum suffering. Public degradation, imperial power on full display, practiced from the 10th century through 1905, when it was officially abolished. Used for treason, patricide, and mass murder. Photographs exist from the early 1900s. Hundreds are documented. It was the ultimate deterrent. Seppuku from ancient Japan, seppuku. Ritualized suicide by disembowelment. Samurai convicted of serious offenses or those who had disgraced themselves used a short blade to cut open their abdomen. A trusted second delivered the final blow. It preserved honor even in death. Practiced from the 12th century into the late 19th century. Used for failure in duty, dishonor, or as an alternative to capture. Hundreds performed seppuku throughout feudal Japan. It remained legal until 1873. Impalement. From ancient Egypt, impalement was used for crimes against the pharaoh or the gods. A sharpened stake was driven through the body, often while still alive, then displayed publicly. The message was clear: defy divine rule, face total destruction. Used from the Old Kingdom through the New Kingdom, roughly 2700 to 1070 BCE. Applied to traitors, temple robbers, and rebels. Tomb inscriptions suggest dozens were impaled as public warnings. Flaying alive from Assyria, flaying alive was punishment for rebellion. The skin was peeled from the body while the victim remained conscious. Assyrian kings documented these acts in carvings, not to hide them, but to broadcast them. Common during the Neo-Assyrian Empire, 911 to 609 BCE. Reserved for rebel leaders and enemy commanders. King Ashurnasirpal II proudly recorded flaying captives in his annals. Reliefs depict dozens of victims. Thrown into a furnace, from ancient Babylon, execution by furnace was reserved for those who defied royal or religious authority. Prisoners were cast into massive kilns or ovens, burned alive. It symbolized purification through fire and absolute submission to the king. Used during the Neo-Babylonian Empire 626 to 539 BCE, famously referenced in the biblical book of Daniel, applied to religious dissenters and political rebels. Documented cases are rare, but likely dozens during Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Child sacrifice in the Tophet from Carthage. Child sacrifice by fire in the Tophet. Infants were placed in the arms of a bronze statue of the god Baal and burned. Whether execution or offering, it reflected the intersection of religion, power, and terror. Practiced from the 8th to 2nd century BCE. Archaeological evidence shows thousands of urns containing charred infant remains. Whether ritual murder or stillbirth burial is debated. Ancient sources claim hundreds were sacrificed during military defeats. The Hemlock Cup. From ancient Greece, the Hemlock Cup was Athens' method for citizens convicted of impiety or corruption. The condemned drank poison made from the hemlock plant. It caused paralysis, then slow suffocation. Socrates was executed this way in 399 BCE, used primarily in classical Athens, 5th to 4th century BCE, reserved for citizens guilty of treason, impiety, or corrupting the youth. Considered more humane than other methods. Exact numbers unknown, but Socrates remains its most famous victim. Breaking on the wheel. From early medieval Europe, breaking on the wheel was used for murder, highway robbery, and violent crimes. The condemned was tied to a large wooden wheel. Executioners used hammers or iron bars to break bones in the limbs and torso. The victim was left on display until death came from shock or exposure. Common from the Middle Ages through the 18th century. Used across Germany, France, and Switzerland. Thousands died this way. The last recorded execution by wheel in Germany was 1841. The Tarpeian Rock. From ancient Rome, the Tarpeian Rock was a cliff on Capitoline Hill. Traitors were thrown from the top, plummeting to their death on the rocks below. Quick, public, symbolic. Used from the Roman kingdom through the Republic, roughly 8th century BCE onward, reserved for traitors and oath-breakers. Dozens are recorded in Roman annals, including the legendary Tarpeia herself, who allegedly betrayed Rome to the Sabines. Boiling alive. From ancient China, boiling alive was another brutal punishment for treason or corruption. The condemned was placed in a large cauldron of water or oil, then heated over a fire. Agonizing, methodical, a visceral warning, used during various Chinese dynasties from the Han Dynasty, 206 BCE to 220 CE onward, applied to corrupt officials and traitors. Dynastic histories reference dozens of cases. The method was also used in medieval Europe for counterfeiters. Trampling under horses. From the Mongol Empire, execution by trampling was reserved for those who betrayed the Khan. The victim was tied down. A herd of horses was driven over them, swift, brutal, deeply tied to the nomadic, cavalry-based identity of the Mongols. Common during the 13th to 14th centuries under Genghis Khan and his successors. Used against traitors and captured enemy leaders. Historical accounts suggest dozens met this fate during campaigns. Stoning. From ancient Persia, stoning was used for adultery and blasphemy. The condemned was buried up to the waist or chest. The community participated in throwing stones until death. It was both a legal sentence and a communal act. Practiced from ancient Mesopotamia through the Persian Empire, circa 550 to 330 BCE, and beyond. Appears in multiple ancient legal codes. Thousands died this way across civilizations over millennia. The Blood Eagle. From Viking Age Scandinavia, the Blood Eagle was a legendary execution for defeated enemies and traitors. The ribs were cut from the spine and pulled outward to resemble wings. The lungs were exposed. Whether myth or reality is debated, but sagas described it as the ultimate act of vengeance. References appear in Norse sagas from the 9th to 11th centuries. Kings and betrayers. Historians debate its authenticity. It may have been symbolic or exaggerated. If real, only a handful of cases are documented. Poenaculii. From ancient Rome, poenaculii. The punishment for parricide, killing one's father. The condemned was sewn into a leather sack with a dog, a snake, a rooster, and sometimes a monkey, then thrown into a river. It symbolized being cast out from humanity itself. Used from the Roman Republic through the early empire, roughly 100 BCE to 200 CE. Reserved exclusively for parricide. Documented cases are rare, perhaps dozens over centuries. Codified in Roman law and described by Cicero. Hanging, drawing, and quartering. From early medieval England, hanging, drawing, and quartering was the penalty for high treason. The condemned was dragged through the streets, hanged until near death, disemboweled while still alive, then beheaded and cut into quarters. Each piece was displayed in different locations. Formalized in 13th century England, remained the legal punishment for treason until 1870. Hundreds died this way. William Wallace in 1305. Guy Fawkes in 1606. The Crown's ultimate display of justice and terror. Execution by elephant from ancient India. Execution by elephant was used for centuries across South and Southeast Asia. War elephants were trained to crush, dismember, or slowly torture condemned prisoners on command. It combined the power of nature with the authority of kings. Used from ancient India through the Mughal Empire, circa 500 BCE to the 1800s. Applied to rebels, murderers, and traitors. Thousands likely died this way over millennia. The last known case in India occurred in the mid-19th century,